Literally no one's going to watch this video because this is the secret to philosophy. And it's a secret to what's wrong with science, and no one wants to know that. So again, I've said this in other videos, philosophy is a business where a lot of what you do is what I would call spontaneous. Now, I used to be a stand-up comic. I know you're like, what the fuck? And what I learned was that the funniest shit you say happens on stage. It doesn't happen when you write your script. Most famous comedians write a script word for word. They read it word for word. If you go watch a famous comedian 2 nights in a row, you will hear the exact same shit. I mean, word for word. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that what we expect philosophy to be, especially when it criticizes science, is not what we're getting. What we're getting is science in the place of philosophy. So when a physicist is imagining the best way to move ahead with physics when things happen which kind of aren't explainable in scientific terms, when these particles can't be predicted, which means in the original state, there's no um, possible prediction for where a particle is in time and space. And the guess is that it's in process. That's the best way to explain it. And once it's observed, it locates in time and space. And so they don't understand why really, but they just move ahead with it anyway. Now, it's not that they're not saying that's what happens. In fact, they are. It's called the observer effect. But again, here's the problem with science. They're not really telling you why. And so a lot of the people that aren't hard scientists, that aren't physicists, aren't particle physicists, don't understand that. And so when the scientific community puts out ideas like observer effect, relativity, in that sense, not what Einstein had in mind, which is different. When the scientific community puts out the rules of knowing, and when these rules of knowing are, in fact, that you don't have to know why, you just kind of adapt to what the only possible conclusion could be. That's a philosophy statement. I know you're all arguing with me. I know you think, oh, he's crazy stand-up comedian, male dancer, bad hair. I know you don't get it that this is a critique outside of either science, which is everything, or the new definition of philosophy, which is really just that it's science. That's my point. I know you don't get that, and so when you hear it, it makes you mad. So 99% of my comments are people that are mad, and that's great. I'm glad you're mad. I'm glad you're commenting. But the problem is that what you're ultimately saying is you don't want the critique. And you really want to attack me in my ability to be a scientist, which I'm not. I don't understand where that one comes from. Or more commonly, is the I hate philosophy argument evidence. And granted, if you're talking about new philosophy, I hate it too. So you're not really going to win that argument. But the point is that, um, and the thing to remember is that there is a difference between, this goes back to this stupid religious debate too, this idea that God is a circle and science is a line. If you're looking for a direct line and you want to stay on that line and you want that line to point you towards something and you have a scientific expectation for what the thing could be at the end of that line, and ultimately there's no end to the line, that's what probabilism means. Probabilism is the idea that science is never 100%, it's always corrigible. In some sense, that's the definition of science for pop culture today. It is that science can always change its mind, and according to David Hume, it's never certain. What's interesting is if you read David Hume, this is what I mean by spontaneous. If you read David Hume, you'll learn that he's less of a scientism thinker. He's less of a radical empiricist. He's less of a reformer of what was rationalism, even common sense philosophy, um, and more of a thinker who just went toward the truth. Got to remember, David Hume put out a scientism outline and then came back from it. At multiple points in his writing, he regretted what he said. And I wasn't there. I'm that old, but I didn't happen to live in Scotland at the time. So I don't know that he saw what was coming, what I call scientism, But I do know that when we blame this all on David Hume, um, it's our subconscious doing it. It's us that we should be blaming, not somebody from 300 years ago that kind of didn't even mean it. I mean, he meant it, but he nuanced it. And so, again, returning to the original point, it is that philosophy is a discussion and it's spontaneous. And that is juxtaposed with scientific ways of knowing which can't exist spontaneously. They have a strict methodology. They have a strict target, which is the physical world. And if physics and the object of a lot of the physics stuff today isn't material or doesn't behave the way material has in every other incarnation of material in the past, then we've got a problem. That's a separate problem. That's a problem with physics. The problem with scientism is just something you see in physics, but it's a problem with all of science, and it is that linear straight line method of thinking defines pop culture, which means I'm not really worried about the scientists ruining the world. I'm worried about the scientific community sending a bad message. But ultimately, it's about where that message goes, and it goes to the 99% of the people who aren't working in the lab. And those people believe this shit. And then they say random crap. And when they are misguided in this way, which means they don't have a fundamental thinking strategy, which is just to say they didn't take a philosophy class the right way, because they don't exist anymore. I taught for 30 years. I can tell you they don't exist as a general rule. There's exceptions to this, me. But there's probably other ones. If I can teach process philosophy, somebody else can. But in general, philosophy is taught as history. It's taught as um, a memorization and a rote strategy for getting what other philosophers have believed. So much so that the propaganda you want from those systems becomes your propaganda. If you believe Hegel and you study Hegel, which you're not going to do probably as an undergraduate, your takeaway might be that history itself is changeable, but it's also changeable in such a way that it changes how we see reality. You see how spontaneous this video is? So the point I'm making with this video is not the point I'm making in the video. The point I'm making is that if you were to experience real philosophy, you would experience what Dostoevsky was talking about in a couple of his shorter works, where he was promoting this idea that real ideas comes from spontaneity. I think Nietzsche believed this too in a lot of ways. And it's a very nuanced idea, but it's also critical of a scientific epistemology or way of knowing as the ultimate source for where you get information and, in no small part, truth itself. So much so that the failure of this system has now forced people to say there is no truth. And this is everything. And this is what Nietzsche saw coming. But every argument and every discussion is predated by these common ideas like truth is an illusion itself, just like the self and cause and effect in reality. Our perception reveals nothing with any meaning. Um, and so, this kind of influence on the masses, I've claimed for some time now, is what you see when you see the downfall. When you see the downfall, there are a lot of reasons that are solid. One being that the further up you get in the power chain, the more affected they are by these uncritical assumptions, so that politicians are running amok and militaries are running amok and nations themselves as language games are running amok. And so the lack of this babbling and this free speech and this comedy and this what I call spontaneous talk, as Sartre might say, erupting into the intellectual general sphere, has made it so that the masses don't have an option. All they have is science, and all they have is the science line protected by a language game, which, and this is the best example, shows itself as these uncritical comments on a video like one I would make. There's not a lot of people making them. There are people that say reality is real. There are people that say consciousness is fundamental but aren't crazy panpsychic. There are people that do these things and they get these same comments, but mine is more stylistic even than content based. That's why my content contradicts itself. And that style is what's the most offensive. I got to end this video at some point, but I did want to make one. I'll leave it up when it gets 2 views so that you can see what it's like to do a more spontaneous um, kind of thread, this imaginary construction of a circular argumentation that reveals something that's closer to how the mind works and how experience works in general. Thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed this long waste of time.